we've got a number of folks that are going to be presenting this presentation, this webinar for everyone. So the first thing I want to say just in an introduction is really, as you guys continue to navigate the challenges and the uncertainties of this pandemic, our goal is to really continue to provide assistance to you regarding the long-term recovery. We know that we're in this for the long haul. And we know that you guys have been working to work through the immediate response to this pandemic. You're working to keep your economy open and moving forward. And we want to just provide whatever assistance we can to plan for this long-term economic recovery. As I said, we've got a number of people on the call, and so I want to do a quick introduction. Kate Guibert is DOLA Rural Prosperity Manager. She's located out here on the Western Slope and is a valuable resource for everyone. She's going to be running through this presentation for folks this morning, and again, it's just another great resource. We also have Patrick Rondinelli, who is the Southwest Regional Manager for DOLA. Greg Winkler is the Northern Mountain Regional Manager. Christy Doon is the South Central Regional Manager. And then we also have Kat Pappenbrock with the Rural Opportunity Representative for the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. So with that, I want to turn it over to Kate, and we'll get started with the presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Give me one moment while I get my presentation up and running. Okay, so as Kimberly mentioned, I'm Kate Guibert. I'm the Rural Prosperity Manager for the Colorado Resiliency Office, which is located in the Department of Local Affairs. And we are here today to get you excited about long-term recovery. I do want to just start with a couple of housekeeping notes. If everyone can make sure that you're on mute. And also, if you could add into the chat window who you are and where you're from, that would be excellent. Also, we're going to encourage at various points today, and we might ask some questions. We'd love for you to add any comments, questions into the chat as we go. We will address those as we go along. So, if you all are anything like me, you have been going extremely fast for the past few months. And you barely make it through the day-to-day, let alone thinking about what the next month will look like, what the next few months will look like. As I mentioned, I live in Crested Butte. I've been traveling around the West Slope. I have been so impressed by the adaptations that I have seen in your communities, the things that you have done to get your downtowns open, to get your economies moving while keeping everybody safe. I know none of us have lived through this before. I know it can often be pretty tiring, and I'm just so impressed. You all are rock stars in the things that you have tried and the things that you have explored throughout the course of this pandemic. So one of the things about long-term recovery that I think is really important is that it really allows us to take a step back, take a deep breath, and really think about the kind of strategic direction that our communities are heading. You know, presumably going into the pandemic, we had visions, goals, aspirations for our community. We don't have to abandon those. So if we can take a moment to think about what's still important, what maybe has changed, reprioritize, and really focus on where we want to go, then maybe some of the decisions that we're making in the short term can really still drive us towards some kind of long-term vision. With that being said, here's what we're going to cover today. We're just going to talk about kind of the groundwork for long-term recovery conversations, talk about developing a vision for recovery in your community, what strategies and actions you might need to define to meet your vision. Talk a little bit about scenario planning, recognizing that none of us know exactly what the future holds. So maybe how do we take back the narrative from this virus, think about a couple of different futures, and have a plan for that. So I like this slide. It's just a simple kind of graphic depiction of thinking about we really need to know where we're going. So at the end of this, what do we want our communities to look like? And that can be based on goals that we have had in the past. there's also an opportunity within this pandemic maybe to think about how we might want to reimagine ourselves in some ways. But we want to have that laid out so that as we kind of move along this roadmap and we meet certain milestones, those milestones are driving us towards a vision. And we have the opportunity to be bold and creative. I think this is really important. This graphic really talks about the fiscal crisis piece of this, which I know is very real for all of us. This is just also about the opportunity to think about different projects, programs, ideas, because the pandemic gives us all a little bit of cover to try something, because then you can say, hey, I don't know about you, but I've never been through a pandemic before. We're going to try this thing, see if it works. If it doesn't, we can pivot and try something else. There's a little bit more of an opportunity for forgiveness. So maybe things that we've wanted to try in our communities in the past, closing down our main streets, different parking strategies, some of that we can experiment with right now without having people be too hard on us if it doesn't go the way that we want. A lot of things aren't going the way that we want right now. So I just like this slide because it really talks about this is really our opportunity to rethink, redesign. Maybe our traditional approaches weren't working and we can abandon those. Maybe we've learned something throughout the course of this pandemic that really does work and we want to continue that beyond when we get to the other side of this. So I think it's important to be creative, get outside your boxes. I know that all of you are doing that. I've seen it all over the state. It's amazing. So maybe if we find a little silver lining, this is a piece of that. I want to talk a little bit because in these following slides, we're going to tell you a little bit about how you do, some visioning, some action planning. And I know a lot of this is happening virtually right now. So I want to just pause for a moment for this note on brainstorming. I don't know about all of you, but one of the things that I found hardest in the virtual world is how we are creative, how we bounce ideas off of each other, how we learn together. That I would much prefer to do in a room with a whiteboard and sticky notes, but we might not have that opportunity right now. So a couple of things. We'll send this slide around, but there's an exercise that I love that's called Think, Pair, Share that I think has a good virtual pivot, which is essentially you have people individually think about kind of a solution to a challenge. This is good for introverts. It gives them a moment. And then they share with the group and you start to group those and you build out your solutions. This think piece is really valuable to do before you go into a meeting. This gives everyone an opportunity to spend a little bit of time, do a little bit of homework, which I have found makes for much more productive virtual meetings. Then you do the share in the virtual setting. And then also explains kind of a cool organization. And once again, we'll send this around that has some really good tips for remote collaboration. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand this over to Patrick Rondinelli, who's going to take the next few slides.
Thanks, Kate. And as Kimberly said, for people that don't know, I'm the Southwest Regional Manager for DOLA. So I cover the entire Southwest part of the Western Slope, where Kimberly covers the Northwest part of the Western Slope here. Very similar to any time that we're doing, we work with a lot of communities, obviously on strategic planning, goal setting, those type of things. It's a lot of the same theories that we're still building off of then. Defining what your values are, really looking at your community, what are the values that you have, what are those things that you do well in your community, what are the things that your organizations, your teams, your strategies, your stakeholders that are working together, what do you do well? And out of that, creating the vision of what you see for your community. Obviously, COVID-19 has had an impact on how we all look at how we're doing our business, our day-to-day businesses, the services that we're providing in our communities, but really starting to gives us this opportunity of where do we want to see our community go? Where do we want this to at the end of this? Going back to that graphic that was at the beginning, what is that long-term vision? And so starting to develop that with your areas and your teams. And it can start internal with your own organization, looking at your organization itself and the services you're providing. I know a number of you, because of the financial restraints that have occurred to a lot of us throughout this year so far with lost revenues and the impacts of the changing society that we've had, you're looking at, okay, we have certain services we're no longer able to provide. Really taking the opportunity to look at what are those key services that need to continue? How do we adapt and change and adjust for those services? but what are those services that maybe we don't need to do anymore because we have changed in this society? And that builds that off of how you start to develop the recovery and what your community is going to look like through this. You know, we all don't know how long this is going to last. I mean, we hear reports of surges or a second surge that we need to be prepared for. The old adage, you know, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. We're all doing that in a lot of our work that we're day to day, but really starting to look at that long term of where do we see our communities, not just 6 months from now. Obviously, we're doing a lot of planning going into the winter. It's already starting. You know, what's that going to look like? But what's it going to look like through the holidays? What's it going to look like next spring? What's even next summer going to look like? What are the lessons that we've learned from this year, the things that we've done well, that we want to be able to continue and move forward into the future with our community and how we do things, and how we operate, how we communicate, how we interact with our communities, and that really talks about all these different things. We mentioned in here talking about consider the different aspects of your community, such as your businesses, obviously, your residents' quality of life, your infrastructure, your natural resources that are out there. And as mentioned before, take the opportunity, don't be bound by convention. Really look at your vision. Take this time to really try new strategies, and some might work, great. But there are going to be some that we all know may not work, but that's fine. We just got to have that flexibility in our organizations to adjust and pivot. When you're working on your vision too, you want to get specific about what you are trying to create, making it descriptive enough that it's something that can be attained by your community, but really have, you know, a clear idea, you know, points, bullets. It doesn't have to be like this vision statement. You can have bullets of this is what we're trying to achieve. Instead of thriving businesses, for example, as an end vision for recovery, think of things that will ensure that your businesses are thriving. Next slide, please.
And I just want to expand quickly on one thing that Patrick said. I think that there's something that's come out of this pandemic that is, you know, we're encouraging you to do this really quickly. This is strategic planning, right? It's not revolutionary, but, you know, you want to be as rapid in response as you have been to the pandemic. I think that this is important for planning going forward, right? We're going to plan more quickly because the world is changing quickly around us. So we want to keep pace with that and maybe rethink the way we plan generally. Okay, sorry, Patrick, keep going.
No, you're exactly right. And that's a really good point that you want to do with that. And that's even getting into this slide of these initial questions that you should be asking. We recommend that you start by, if you haven't already, I know a lot of you have already formed a recovery team or a resiliency team that you call it, most people are calling it recovery team, but really forming that resilience and recovery team. And it shouldn't just be local to your organization. You as county or local government should be driving the conversation. You're the facilitators with this, but it's really important to have the stakeholders in your community, and your stakeholders include obviously elected officials, your staff. Emergency management plays a critical role in that. Public health, because of the crisis that we are dealing with, plays an important role with that. Economic development organizations, school districts, if you have higher education in your community, you want to do that. Really look at members of your community who represent the diverse businesses in your community, your industries that are out there, your local chambers of commerce, nonprofits that work in your organization. Consistently across the board, what we've seen throughout what we've been through over the last 6 months, and us at DOLA, is we are out communicating with our communities or traveling around and working with the different communities. The communities that are engaging this wide range of stakeholders and pulling together a team that develops a strategy of flexibility and adjustment are the ones that are really being successful. So creating that strategy, that organization, that framework that you have that can adjust and adapt to a lot of these issues, and then working down these challenges and these questions that are being brought forward. Next slide. And then also taking the time to pause and define what opportunities are out there. I think we've seen a lot, once again, as government has become more nimble and connected with their communities, you want to build upon that. What have you been doing? As an example I would throw out here is, what is some of the structure you put in place or the steps you put in place to communicate to your community about resources or what is going on with closures of city halls or county courthouses, and how you're having to adjust the way we're doing business with that. There's been a lot of great strategy that's been out there of how that communication is going out to your citizens, but continue to build on that. One of the key things I think that I look at this constantly, and in every community that I talk to about is, as we start to get into a normalcy, and I know it's hard to say what feels normal now, but as we do start to get into a normal routine, don't start to slip back into, okay, we have to go back to do things like we used to do them. Look at what adjustments you've made now, and maybe those are things that remain in place going forward, even once we're past this COVID-19 piece, really looking at and examining how you're doing government, how you're engaged your community and your stakeholders, and building those relationships together. The unknown and uncertain nature of COVID-19 gives us this opportunity, once again, to try these things, reimagine aspects of your community, and even accelerate your community forward in a lot of ways, in a lot of areas that maybe those opportunities weren't there before. Next one, please. Define emerging and ongoing impacts and disruptions. So once again, COVID-19 is the stress that we're dealing with right now, but there are a lot of those issues that are out there in your communities that existed before COVID-19, and now they're either being enhanced or you've had to shift resources from those things, but you still need to come back to all those issues. We know, like looking at this list here, the examples of ongoing stress highlighted by COVID-19, the lack of economic diversification. How many of your communities were already working on that prior to COVID-19, but now also we have this? What are those opportunities that are out there that you can capitalize on? A lot of communities are really putting a lot of emphasis and effort towards broadband right now, because we're doing what we're doing now today, how dependent we've become on being able to continue to do businesses that we do, our day-to-day services that we're providing, but having to do it in this remote type format. Well, what is the infrastructure that needs to be in place now? How do we prioritize? What strategies do we develop and teams do we create to adjust and tackle these problems? And even going back to some of those questions in the previous slides, as you've identified what those challenges are, creating those teams around and giving them the tools and flexibility that they need, or the resources they need to try to solve those problems, to adjust and adapt to what are the challenges that are being brought forward, and moving your community back towards that vision that you've created. And how you prioritize these challenges, once again, is going to be the challenge that we all face, and how we work within our organizations. We can't get into necessarily a big room together and do the good old-fashioned exercises that we do to help prioritize, but you can still find ways to do that in these new environments and try to move your communities forward. Next slide. So the idea out of this is now creating a recovery roadmap, that you're creating this plan that through the engagement with all your stakeholders in your community, you're creating this roadmap of what you want to follow, of how you're going to get towards that vision that you're moving towards, and then communicating that roadmap out to your community. So all your citizens know who it is, whether it's your business community, whether it's your neighboring jurisdictions, and really trying to encourage you to look at a lot of this from a regional aspect too. Obviously you're going to start within a municipality, for example, and building what your vision is, but how does that align with what the county's vision is? How does that align with your neighboring jurisdictions, other counties and other municipalities? A lot of this that we've seen out of this whole experience is how interconnected we all are, and how dependent we all are in the successes or the decisions and actions we make in one community, how that can have a ripple effect into some of those other communities. So really expanding that idea, that engagement out into those other areas, but creating that roadmap that really aligns with those practices that are with your other communities that are out there. Action planning, steps to get to strategies. Try role mapping. Who is in charge of moving strategies and actions forward? Identifying those teams that are out there. Build those teams around those strategies. Having the flexibility, you may have people in your organization that are serving on 2 or 3 different teams that are taking on challenges, but bringing in the dynamic or the different perspectives from your community to take on these challenges and build upon the relationships that have been there in place. And then a lot of it is the rapid evaluation. We traditionally in government are slow at how we react and adjust to things because it's difficult for our citizens. We want consistency, for example, in what we do in our day-to-day services. And our citizens depend on that consistency that's going to be there. But you've got to also build in these times that we're dealing with, rapid evaluation. We've created a strategy to address an issue. Are we being successful? How are our measurements going towards that solution? Do we need to regroup, take a step back, and go a different direction? How are we communicating when that is doing? How are we seeking feedback from our citizens or our community, our business community, whatever type of segment that we're working on in regards to that challenge right now? Making sure you're doing that adjustment. But once again, we have that flexibility that we may not necessarily have had in the past because of this crisis that's occurring. So it's really taking the crisis and turning it into an opportunity of where you want to go going forward. So with that, we'll go to the next slide and let Kate take over again.
I want to pause for just 1 minute and ask maybe a question of everybody that's on the call, which is, I'm wondering if anyone's willing to share. You can put this in the chat or you can unmute and share out loud. Maybe some approaches that you have, either you've abandoned something and that's working really well. Maybe you changed the regulation, you changed the policy, and that's really served your community, or you've tried something new that you think you might be carrying even beyond the pandemic. So I have to ask my colleagues because all I can see is my presentation right now. If there's things in the chat, maybe read them out. And again, I also encourage any of you to unmute and share. So I want to just give 1 minute for everybody to share some of what they've been trying.
Yeah, Kate, this is Kimberly. There's nothing in the chat just yet.
Don't be shy, everyone. We learn best from each other. One of the things that we did early on in this pandemic is we formed this rural economic adaptation and futures committee. And it consisted of state agencies as well as a bunch of local and regional experts, because I had this moment where I realized I really don't have the answers to this. And I just need to be able to be in a group where I can say, I don't know, but let's vet, let's share, let's try. So I really like to use these forums to do that. So speak up.
I'd add to what Kate was just saying is a lot of us don't have answers to a lot of these things, but once again, where we've seen a lot of successful ideas that have come forward with other people, it's because they sit in a room, or a virtual room, they sit in this moment and start to have that conversation and say, well, what about this? Well, what about that? And start to build off of those ideas. So, take advantage of that opportunity with those groups that you're creating on your recovery teams.
So Kate from Nancy Carey, she posted that immediately they held twice weekly business calls to find out what they needed. And they're still holding those calls to brainstorm ideas and solutions. They pivoted to being as flexible as possible to meet business needs, knowing when they succeed, we in business succeed. So I think that's a great example of the work that they did for their local economy.
Thanks, Nancy. Okay, I'm going to surge ahead here. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about scenario planning, and I actually think that I should have renamed this slide, which is just really scenario planning, really planning for uncertainty. So while we might be thinking about the winter more immediately and when we have spikes and surges, this is really just a tool for us to help think about a number of different ways that the future might unfold. So before we dive into the scenario planning, I think it's really important before we plan for a number of different futures that we stop and take a minute to reflect. And that is a really important thing to do in this long-term recovery process, which is what we've learned. So what have we learned since the first shutdown? Did we organize in a way that we think was effective? Did we have everyone at the table? how is our communication structure functioning? Did we have one source of trusted information? Was information flowing from this entity to other stakeholders? We know that there's a lot of information out there. DOLA and the field team really tries to be at least one source of trusted information, but I know that then there's ways that this flows out into your community. Who is missing? And, Patrick mentioned this. You really want to tap all assets in your community during these recovery conversations. This isn't just that maybe local government, public health, and businesses at the table. Tap your creative arts community. They can bring resources, they can bring fun and excitement, and some kind of economic development pieces to this conversation as well. We all could use a little fun right now. Talk about how the relationships went between how you worked well with public health and how public health might have worked well with your business community. Once again, these all need to happen in lockstep. Okay, so once you've taken your moment to reflect, doing a little bit of scenario planning, once you have a vision and some strategies in place, it's good to stress test those again, a bunch against different versions of the future. And we know that we just don't know what this is going to look like in the long haul. So I heard this really simply put actually on a webinar this week, which I really liked, which was just looking at 3 scenarios. A challenging scenario. So let's say that things continue to be hard, or there are added layers of challenge. Let's say we have spikes that are unexpected. We have overlays of wildfire, which I know many of you are facing right now. So really think about kind of the worst possible scenario and play out how some of the strategies you've defined might work in that scenario. The expected, and this is a little bit more about kind of just current trajectory. We expect that we'll be some level of open, there will be restrictions, but we are going into winter. So what does that look like? It's going to look different. A lot of these great outdoor adaptations are going to have to move indoors. So what do we look like under that scenario? And then the visionary scenario, which I really like, which is what can we be? What is this reimagined piece? What would we like to look like? And what are some of the things that we could do to get to that scenario where maybe things are a little bit easier on us? What do we want to look like post-vaccine? And then you run these scenarios over different time horizons. Again, so maybe the next 6 months, what does winter look like? It's going to be different. And then post-vaccine, I think it's really important to look at. We don't know what this timeline is going to be, but what's going to look different in our communities? We will have lost businesses. Our downtowns might look different. And we have to be able to realize the challenges and opportunities within that.
So Kate, we have a couple of other comments in the chat. So David Frank from Montrose talked a little bit about that they've been pursuing economic diversity for a number of years, and it's helped stabilize their budget during the pandemic. So, again, working pre-COVID has helped them, continue to transition through COVID. La Plata EDA, they immediately established a task force of leading organizations to help assess and assist all businesses with navigation tools as they change so rapidly. So again, it's, they're continuing to see the evolution of this and needing to be nimble and adjust to some of the changing conditions. And that group still meets and continues to work on recovery for everybody. So just a couple of additional comments.
Yeah, and I'll just add with that. Oh, go ahead, Kate.
No, go ahead, Patrick.
I was just going to add, being that both Durango and Montrose are in my region, and I'm familiar with what they're doing, is those are perfect examples. They had some of that foundation that they put in place as they adjusted to it, but they're continuing that. And those are those things that you look at and say, do we continue this beyond what we've done now? How are we engaging our business community, for example? What are the weekly or bi-weekly meetings that we're having, the feedback we're getting, the adjustments that we're making into the way we do our services or the rules and regulations that we're creating? Is there immediate feedback that we can take and make quick adjustments and move our community forward towards that vision that we have, but building upon the structure that's in place, that's been created as we've gone through COVID-19?
Yeah, and I would just add to, what Montrose said is really important, right? A lot of what we talk about in the Colorado Resiliency Office is what is the stuff that we do on the forefront that might help buffer us going forward. And I think, okay, well, we're in the pandemic now. So that's a little hard to think about, but I do think that there's good lessons in this, that if we start to do some of these actions on the forefront, it might help us absorb some of these disruptions going forward. And this isn't going to be our last disruption, right? Whether, it's a fire or a flood, or, the world is just changing quickly. So these are good, at least, if anything, from this pandemic, we can capture those lessons and take them forward. I would also mention that with the Lapata County example, I know that they've started to organize themselves into a what they call kind of the strategic, and Lapata County, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe kind of you have a reimagination committee now, as well as kind of your strategic tactical day-to-day, which I think is really inspired, and I really love that idea, because we want to take advantage of both, right? We have to do the tactical day-to-day stuff, but if we can also have a little group that's thinking forward, that'll help us in the long run. And, I've been thinking a little bit about this adaptation group that we've had that's really been in response to COVID. What I've been thinking, well, this should really be our just state rural economic futures committee, right? This group that's been thinking about adaptations now, how do we catapult that group into the future? That I think that there's value in having conversations about what we think might be changing down the line. So back to scenario planning. Just a couple of different questions to help prompt you to think about questions to ask under different scenarios. So the first question is, how do we work together under these different scenarios? And does it look different under the challenging scenario versus the visionary scenario? My take is probably going to be not. It's probably going to look the same. And as Patrick mentioned, I know a lot of you already have these recovery groups in place that consist of more than just these three entities listed here. It's really important to get all the stakeholders at the table. We'll keep emphasizing that again and again. You have so many assets in your community, and they've really been showing up. I know entrepreneurs have been filling PPE gaps, and you also have to have your school district right there alongside, especially as we begin to open back up right now. We all just need to be communicating and be transparent and have those relationships in place. What systems do we need in place for businesses and industries to keep them open and safe? I think this is an important question, again, as we begin to think about winter and what's going to change come winter. And what does local government do to help educate and help local businesses with their own kind of planning for these shifts? I've just seen so many great messaging campaigns come out of local governments in partnership with their business community right now. I'm so impressed by everybody. I know this is not easy. The big nut to crack right now, what's going to happen come fall and winter? I'd love to hear what some of you are thinking. So if you want to start populating the chat now with some of the ways that you're thinking about winter adaptations, if you have started or if you haven't, it'd be great to hear too that we're just starting to have that conversation, or maybe we're far into it, and some of the ideas that you're coming up with.
And Kate, along that line, if people could even talk a little bit about the challenges that they think they might be facing as we go into the winter months. There's been several discussions with the governor's office and the ski industry to talk about what does that look like for a significant industry in Colorado to reopen. So if you have some ideas or thoughts about what challenges you're trying to overcome as you prepare for the winter months, I think that would be a great discussion to have as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. Yeah, once again, please start adding that into the chat. The more of that we have, the better. And I think this last bullet's really important, and I don't have the answer to this, but I think it's something that we should consider, which is how we maintain kind of momentum and behavior change when everybody's tired and stressed. So, I just think that we all, first of all, need to take a moment ourselves. I know all of you have been working really hard, and take that deep breath and reorient, and then also try to find ways to maybe inspire those that we work with, build some excitement. I think it's going to be really important. I know this is the long haul. I got really tired early on of people saying it's a sprint and it's a marathon. Like, I don't want to do both. Don't make me do both. That's too much. So again, just take care of yourselves. But I think it's good to try to find some ways to have fun as we can along the way. So with that being said, one more question to you all that we just posed before. I would love to hear how you're thinking about winter. As Kimberly said, what challenges you think you might be facing, where there might be gaps in resources. Again, you can plug that into the chat, or you can unmute and say that out loud as well. So I want to take a pause here.
One thing that I'll throw out while we're taking a pause here, because it came up on the chat too about making this presentation available to all of you. Obviously, absolutely, we will be doing that. And we recognize there's a lot of information we put into a lot of these slides, and a number of you may want to go back and digest it a little bit too. Please know you have us as a resource to really help and dive down further into any of these pieces that you would want. That we're more than happy to help guide or assist and facilitate in some way of drilling deeper down into any of these pieces.
So
yeah,
Kate,
I would. Yeah, Kimberly, go ahead.
yeah, sorry, there was a chat. Mary Jo from the town of Pagosa Springs says they have already looked at temporary building adjustments submitted by the businesses, similar to summer variances, tents, using sidewalks, etc. They are now looking at ways to deflect snow loads to utilize space for waiting areas or seating for restaurants.
Excellent.
I would be curious to ask the group, what are you hearing from your businesses about their issues or needs going into a different season?
And I just want to expand on what Patrick said. Our offer to all of you following this webinar is we do have kind of what we call a toolkit version of this presentation that's in a bit more detail and has a companion worksheet or two, but we are also offering, if your community is interested in thinking about doing some of this planning, to maybe kind of facilitate like a first conversation on that to get you started. So again, reach out to your regional managers if that's something that you're interested in. Okay, if there's nothing else in the chat, I'm going to move us on.
Kate, just before you do, I would just like to throw out too, obviously we're doing a lot of focus on the economic side of things right now because that's been a big impact. But once again, as you're looking into that, doing that visioning going forward and some of the scenarios that we're looking at, it's not all about our local businesses too. What are those other challenges that we're going to be facing as we go into winter time? What are, our members of our communities that are have their own challenges, whether they're healthcare related or mental health issues that are out there? What are you doing to adjust and adapt for those people? I think of like in some of the communities where you have more senior citizens and some of the services that are being provided to senior citizens today, and trying to still engage and give them a sense of community that's out there, that we have some flexibility that we can do during the summertime because we're outdoors, we're able to put together events or opportunities that are outside. But what's that going to look like inside now, and how do we adjust and adapt with those things? So really, looking at this across the board, not just on economic development, but any of those services we have out there, including, we all know we have a major election coming up in November. What's that going to look like? What are you addressing and adjusting to now in your community to be prepared and help your citizens as the future moves forward?
Kate, a couple more comments. Nancy Carey says the ski industry is going to be key to state economic as well as our local economies. If COVID surges after the ski resorts open, that could cause the local economies to close down again, which would be catastrophic. Restaurants are worried about winter operations for obvious reasons. 50% capacity is not enough to sustain them. Tents can't handle snow loads, etc. Wilma Irvin from the city of Delta, indoor recreation is huge in their community. Working with their local health department in making this happen has been a real challenge when everyone thinks we just need to do it. The rec center is the release for many for this stress. How are others making this happen? So that's a question to the group posed by Wilma. So any feedback or answers from other communities about how you're making this happen with your rec centers or community centers?
Okay, I'm going to move us forward, but again, please populate with any feedback or answers to Wilma's question would be great as well. One local highlight, and there are 100. I want you to know that I, again, have been exceptionally impressed by all of you. But in terms of when we're thinking about scenario planning, one thing that I have been impressed by is Gunnison County's Economic Recovery Dashboard and Coronameter. And I just want to highlight this Coronameter, which is a 5-tiered system, and it links various health indicators to different levels of community openness. And I think that this has been a really nice, clear, and transparent way for both residents of the county as well as businesses to know exactly where the county is at any given point, and to understand what happens if a health indicator might tip into a different status and why that may change some of the regulations. So I just do think that this is a good resource, at least to look at different scenarios, to have some standards in place that everybody understands. And again, I know there are 100 examples, and I want you all to share them with us, because the more of that, the more information that we have that we can share, the better. Okay, we're going to talk resources, everyone's favorite part of the conversation. We're going to start with DOLA, and we're going to move to edit, but I'm going to turn this over to Greg Winkler to take the first few bullets on this slide.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We at DOLA always try to encourage you to make good planning, do good planning, provide for strategic thinking and so forth like that. But we don't only come to the program with what we think you should do or what we want to help you to do. We do come with some resources to be able to make that happen. And one of the first ones is our Energy Mineral Impact Assistance Fund, which, although it's changed this year, and our next application is October 1st, rather than the August 1st that we just passed. And then our next grant funding cycle will be March 1st. We had to do this because we were hit, just like every other entity out there, with economic concerns regarding the resources that come into that fund. So the fund, as it stands right now, we were running about $20 million a cycle in grant making, has now gone down to $15 million for both the October and the March cycle. Nevertheless, we still have administrative grant program, which are the $25,000 grants to help with planning and so forth like that. And then, of course, there's technical assistance that's been alluded to by both Kate and Kimberly and Patrick, that we can come in and we can get on the phone with you, we can get on a Zoom meeting with you, and in fact, if you need us to, we actually can show up and try to help you and your community work through this process that we've outlined here. And as Patrick said, it's not only economic development, although that's a very important part of it. There are other parts to recovery for your community. Just the whole health and human services and local public health and the interaction between that and your policymakers. So that's an avenue that has traditionally been there for DOLA and will continue in the future, although in a bit of a modified situation right now. Some other options for funding. We just opened up the notice of funding availability for CDBG coronavirus funding for public facilities. We have $800,000 in that program for this cycle going around. I believe it goes all the way to, I think applications are due sometime in September, and then we'll try to get some money out the door after that. But it's mostly to help communities with public facilities that they think need to be put into place to help with coronavirus, both now and perhaps in the future. It appears that the state of Colorado says that there's enough critical care excess hospital beds available, but those may not be close to your particular jurisdiction, and you may want to look into something like that. So we do have information on our website about CDBG CV, but it is for public facilities. There is sort of a short time frame on applying for that. But if you have questions and you can't get them answered on the website, then please feel free to call any one of the regional managers. And then, of course, the last funding and most of the major funding that is out there right now is the CARES Act funding, which was allocated to both local governments, municipalities, and counties, and also to special districts. And this is money that's been allocated for necessary expenditures that have been incurred between March 1st and December 30th of this year. They were not accounted for in your budget, the one you approved to run your 2020 annual expenditures. And then it is expressly to be used for expenses and related to COVID-19. It is the most flexible money that the federal government has given out that's been allocated to local governments, yet it still has to hit those three major points. And then there is a lot of information on the website about Treasury guidelines and also some guidelines from the Office of the State Controller and the Office of State Planning and Budgeting. So as you look through to the expenses that you've already incurred between March 1st and say June 1st, those can be refunded provided you have a contract in place, and we're working frantically with the staff in Denver to get contracts out to each entity that has applied for it. For those entities that have not, there will be, and I don't have dates on this, but there will be a round where the it's the excess fund or the supplemental fund will be open for those people who had not applied the first time around, and for those entities that have expended the money that was allocated to them initially. And that should be in the September-October timeframe, because this money runs out and needs to be spent by December 30th, 2020. So those are the funding resources that we can bring to help you do what we've shown in this presentation today about long-term recovery, not only for the economic vitality of your communities, but also for your communities as a whole. And we're more than willing to put forth whatever efforts with you in order to make these things happen. So thanks for the time.
So Greg, there's a question posted from Kendall Kramer confirming that for this round of CDBG, the funds must benefit 70% LMI and not the typical 51%. Looking at what's posted on our website, it does state that 70% of the funds must benefit low and moderate income households or areas.
Yes. I don't know what else. That's exactly what it says.
Yeah, and so Kendall, if we need to, we can certainly follow up and make sure that we're giving you the correct information as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes, down below under the eligibility section, it speaks to the 51%. So I was just seeking clarification on that because there's two different numbers in there. So
we will definitely get back to you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Right.
Thanks for the question.
All right, I'm going to jump in now. Is that okay, Kate? I see you about to. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Marguerite Harden, and I'm the newest addition to the CRO team. And I'm going to jump in just to talk about the last 4 bullets on this DOLA Resources slide. And actually just to follow up with what Greg was saying on the CARES Act funding, we've heard a lot of questions about coronavirus relief funds and how they can be used and what is eligible. And this Thursday, I run a Adaptations in Future webinar series, and this Thursday's conversation will be just strictly around CVRF funds, those funds that need to be spent before the end of the year, and how you can use them. You'll be hearing directly from our financial assistance team who's reviewing applications, so that could be a great resource for you. But to move on, this bullet on what is this COVID-19 Community Adaptation Hub? It's really an online space where we're showcasing different innovations and adaptations that largely local governments are doing in response to COVID-19. So I'm going to also drop this into the chat since I know you can't click on this slide. But generally, we are just trying to create forums for people to learn from each other so that we're not just trying to trial and error our way out of COVID-19. It's an ever-evolving space, and we encourage you to reach out if you have an adaptation that you're doing in your community that has been successful, and we'll make sure we start highlighting that. This next bullet, the Small Communities Workshop, that's an annual event that has gone virtual starting this year, obviously. So the conversations are on Thursdays, and last Thursday was the kickoff. So this Thursday, we're covering economic development and community financial first aid. And the following Thursday, on the 27th, you'll hear from us at the Colorado Resilience Office on different resources you have. And then there will be another conversation on affordable housing. It continues. So I can drop that link into the chat as well. And then this next bullet is on a peer exchange that I run. And the peers, who we mean by that are really local government peers who are engaged in recovery. So we have recovery managers, we have the unusual suspects that jump into recovery manager type positions or recovery roles within their local governments. And we have participation across the state from governments of all different shapes and sizes. And it's a meeting that occurs every other Thursday. We just had it this past Thursday. So our next meeting will be on the 27th. It's 1 hour. And by joining this group, you also get access to an online peer exchange forum that is password protected. We also put up resources there. We have a lot of guest speakers. I'm hoping for this coming 27th week, we'll actually be talking about how to support homelessness in the community, in each community, everyone's communities, and different resources that are out there. So those agendas really are peer driven. We at the CRO are just acting as a facilitator of the conversations you all want to have. So it could be a really great place to sign up. And finally, the Main Street program has been around for a while. I'm sure it needs a little introduction, but it is for downtown revitalization, and there's applications that are ongoing to become both a candidate and an affiliate. And you can just reach out to your DOLA regional manager or your Main Street affiliate. So that is DOLA Resources. From what I understand, I'll be passing it on to Kat from OEdit.
Great. Thanks so much, Marguerite. And I have a number of slides here, but I'm going to roll through them really quickly. They're going to be part of the presentation that Kate sends out, and all of the links are live to the respective resources. But what I really want to kind of put out from the Office of Economic Development International Trade side are some of the ongoing things that we're working on for long-term recovery and resiliency, as well as some resources that are available right now, or as you in your community, since you've gotten such a closer connection with your businesses through this crisis, to just sort of have in the back of your head as pieces of that toolkit as you move through your scenario planning and visioning and things like that. So we have a number of pending programs that we're hoping to have coming online within the next couple of months. There are actually 3 EDA grant applications by OEdit and DOLA that are pending through the CARES Act funding. We have a partnership with DOLA on basically long-term recovery roadmaps for community cohorts. So that's one of them. The tourism office has put one in for tourism recovery adaptations and long-term tourism visioning for those of you that have tourism impacted economies, which on the Western Slope is almost all of us. And then the third one is from OEDIT around revolving loan funds and expanding those for both our metro and rural areas. We're hoping to hear on those within the next month, and we'll definitely be sending out information on those to the communities. The RTAP program, Regional Technical Assistance Program, which many of you may have participated in, because of COVID and sort of the changing conditions, is also under review at this point. We're working on kind of figuring out what the most needed adaptations and programs at the community and business level are going to be. There's going to be an initial program hopefully launching by October that's really going to be business oriented for ongoing compliance with COVID and just adaptations and best practices as we kind of move through the long-term range of this. And then of course, because we're all still limited of meeting in person, we're working on a remote learning platform that's going to allow much broader access on the community and business level to a lot of those resources. Eventually, the RTAP program will be loaded onto that as well. The SBDC Small Business Development Center network continues to be an asset to all of your small businesses. They did receive additional funding out of the CARES Act as well to support small businesses for coronavirus-specific consulting. So make sure that you're connected with your local regional office and sending businesses that way. A couple of things as you kind of continue to think about growth. If you have businesses that are located in an opportunity zone that are potentially thinking about expanding or needing capital infusion, there are a couple of accelerator programs for businesses to learn how to engage in that, connect with investors, and go through that whole program. And that's actually open right now. Next slide, please. Again, as we're looking at businesses and transitioning, whether they're, aging out and looking to sell or potentially looking at, work throughs or transitioning out if they need to, there is an employee ownership program that might be sort of a long-term recovery way to keep the business within the community and shift ownership to employees. There are a lot of different models in the state of Colorado. There's some great support for that one. Remote work obviously has become a real life scenario for all of us. And we're also seeing a lot of engagement and interest in a lot of our communities about either attracting remote workers or training their local workforce on how to be better remote workers. So there are some marketing grants still available for communities, but that's also an initiative that we're working with Energize Colorado on in the long term. There's a little webinar link down there if you want to learn a little bit more about the existing program within OEDIT. Next slide, please. Rural Jumpstart, a lot of you know that there was a change to that this year. Again, this is sort of more longer term planning, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Same thing with advanced industries programs. If you have businesses that are looking to expand or looking at that export opportunity that's come up, great resources there as well. Next slide. So for our tourism piece, of course, there's a lot of frontline training that needs to happen. The Colorado Tourism Office has adapted its Colorado Concierge program. This is free for all frontline workers. It's not just about responsible tourism and knowing your region, but also COVID adaptations at this point. And then Outdoor Rec, in terms of funding, their marketing matching grant program for fiscal year 21 is open now, so there's a link to that if your communities are interested. And Outdoor Rec continues to develop regional coalitions. Minority Business Office, again, really working with minority business owners around certifications and connections to federal contracts and really expanding their reach in that marketplace. And then the last couple of slides, next one please, are just, I believe, with some of our partners that we're working with. Oops, sorry for the, the shift in the images there. We continue to have small business critical resource calls for both the West Slope and the East Slope of Colorado every other Wednesday. This week it's all about financial resources and just a quick tune-up on federal funding. And also, as you continue to see in your business environment, if one business closes or there are startup opportunities, Startup Colorado is a great connection for them to kind of help mentor them through with training scholarships for learning, that sort of thing. Next slide. Again, on the business end of thing, there is a great committee that's been pulled together by the Colorado Lawyers Committee that's really helping to match small businesses that need limited legal advice for COVID-related issues. They're having a really great webinar this week that's currently closed, but will be available afterwards if you have anybody that's dealing with eviction issues. And then finally, for all of your cultural organizations or anybody that's having to shift their programming to move online or adaptations, there's a great partnership with the College of Arts and Media at CU, their creative core, that can help them work through that. Next slide. And then finally, you've probably heard a lot about Energize Colorado. Their kind of key priorities are listed below there. Again, if your businesses are still having issues with PPE supply, that's one of the best places to go. Manufacturer's Edge, again, ongoing support for your local manufacturers. And then on the agriculture side of things, the Economic Development Council of Colorado has partnered with the Colorado Food Systems Alliance to really start looking at those supply chains within agriculture and opportunities. So if that's something that you're interested in, we can definitely connect you with them as well. And then last slide is all about available funding resources. So we continue to update our alternative funding worksheet that's really directed toward businesses between grants, loans, deferrals, et cetera. We try to continue updating that about once a week. It's kind of settling a little bit. But the big one that you've probably heard a lot about is that Energize Colorado Gap Fund. We'll be previewing that on both of the business support calls this week, but the general guidelines of that are available there. We're waiting on the opening of that within the next week or so, so keep an eye on it. But it's really geared, it's a grant and potential loan component, and really in 4 phases looking at underserved businesses through CARES Act, right? So you've got tourism impacted businesses, minority owned businesses, rural businesses, and those that didn't receive support from the first time. So just keep your eyes open for that one and kind of give yourself a quick overview for your local community. That's it for me. And again, the last slide is just my contact information, and feel free to reach out for any questions that you might have as you kind of go through your visioning and scenarios and how we can help kind of make those implementation and planning pieces fit for you.
Thanks, Kat. I love your ROR branding, by the way. I want branding that cool for my title. Does anybody have any questions for Kat before we open it up to just general Q&A?
Kate, there's nothing in the chat, but there's been a few comments about making sure that we share this presentation. So what are your thoughts on how you want to share the presentation for folks?
Yeah, you bet. I will have the regional managers share this out through their email lists, because that was a lot of resources we threw at you, so we don't expect you to memorize all that.
Can we also post on a website for folks as well?
Yeah, you know what? We can get this up on the Colorado Resiliency Office's website as well.
Okay.
And I saw that Drew Peterson still on the line from DHSEM. I didn't know if he wanted to chime in with any resources or comments. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you all. Okay, Drew might have popped off. Okay, any general, there we go, now I can see everybody. Any general questions before we pop off here? Again, you can put them in the chat or you can unmute, but we will share this presentation with all of you.
Kate, just as a follow-up on the CDBG question, we did confirm with program staff that it is the 51% low to moderate income threshold, not the 70%. And if
Thanks, Kimberly.
If you have other questions, certainly can reach out to any of the regional managers for further guidance.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Again, we are happy to follow up and do a deeper dive on some of this content with all of you. So please reach out to your regional managers should you need more. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.